All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the folks who just arrived. Welcome to the university folks to the Accountability Peer Group meeting for 2019, and welcome back for all of the community and technical colleges who've been with us this morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The morning folks already heard a little bit of this, but have to say that we have had kind of record participation, and we have really great attendance today. So I really want to thank folks for being here in person, because part of what we're trying to do is build community around our peer groups, but also around regional collaboration, and that is hard to do if you're not physically together. And so anyway, really appreciate the travel time that you've put in to be here, time, distance, dollars, and time away from your email and other things that compete for your time. I forgot to make one announcement at the end of the last session, and it's kind of pertinent to everyone. For the top improver analysis, a lot of folks said they would be interested in seeing all the institutions, not just the kind of the high performers. And so we're going to be doing a webinar on April 11th at 10 a.m. We'll post it to the coordinating board events page. But we're going to do just a webinar to show how you can easily download this improvement information and make these same kinds of comparisons. And so by doing that, you can have the entire state data. We use our interactive data, so exactly what we can do, you can replicate, and so I want to make that available for everybody who's interested. So April 11th at 10 a.m. we'll have that webinar. Okay. So we do have folks on the phone line as well, so thank you to them, and welcome to folks who are on the line. We're going to have this first part is going to be broadcast for this first 45 minutes to an hour, kind of this introduction back into the regional target work for 60 by 30 techs, and then we'll be doing breakouts after that. So everyone will be in different rooms. So if you are not comfortable at the moment, know you're only going to be here a short time. There are also some spots up at the tables if folks in the back want to trickle up. You're more than welcome to do that. Just a little reminder to folks on the line, if you're connected, just go ahead and mute so we can try and keep the noise down in here. And if you have any trouble or any questions, Luis Martinez is the one to contact, and his email is up on the slides right now. So for introductions, what I want to do, there are so many people in the room, we're not going to introduce everybody, but what I want to do is introduce a few folks from our side and then do a little show and tell on what regions folks are in. So if we haven't met yet, again, welcome. I'm Jenna Cullinane-Heggie, and I'm a Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Strategic Planning and Funding Division. And it's my pleasure to talk a lot about the accountability system and how we can leverage our data not only to understand the trends, but think about how we're going to act on the insights provided by these data. Julie Eklund will come down probably at some point, our Assistant Commissioner for the division, but also want to make sure that you know that the regional points of contact are here. So each region has a point of contact, and actually I may introduce them at the end since I can see they're not all here at the moment. So this afternoon is all about kind of a regional focus, and for folks who have been deeply engaged in this, the next 45 minutes or so, some of this will be a refresher, because I know there are folks in the room who have not been involved in this regional work, but don't worry, there are new pieces at the beginning and at the end that folks haven't seen. So hopefully a little something for everybody as we dig into our progress on 60 by 30 techs and this regional lens and strategy that we're bringing to the work. So first, just again for introductions, raise your hand if you are from the High Plains. All right, we got some High Plains folks trickled throughout. Okay, great. And if you're from Northwest. Okay, lonely over there maybe, hopefully not. We got a few more people trickling in. How about from our Metroplex? All right, hello, welcome, Metroplex. From the Upper East. Great. Raise them high and proud. Southeast. Welcome, Southeast. And from our Gulf Coast. All right. Welcome. Thank you. Central Texas. They've got the benefit of home turf, so welcome. South Texas. All right, great. And West Texas. Okay, good. Thank you. And Upper Rio Grande. They're all online. That's right. That's right. Okay. We knew that at a time. Well, thank you everyone for coming and obviously representing the full breadth of the state. And as we've started doing this regional work, again and again, it strikes me that there are very important contextual differences between what's going on in each region. There are different, not only mixes of institutions, population demographics are different, the labor markets are very different, and so this has even, we made this commitment to this strategy, but again and again, we keep coming back to this seems like an important way to talk about progress towards 60 by 30 techs so that we can have locally, contextually relevant conversations about what are your challenges and who are the people that you're trying to serve and how best to serve them. So again, as I said, we're going to be, we have about 3 hours presentation and then followed by breakout time. And what we're aiming to accomplish is for the afternoon breakouts, what I would love for you to leave with for the afternoon is to be knowledgeable about the latest regional 60 by 30 text data and to be able to share key insights with stakeholders back home. Number two, I'd love for you to understand how your institutional completion targets, which everyone did last August, how those are fitting into the regional whole. Number three, to be aware of the status of regional cooperation and various plans for implementation that are happening in your region related to regional strategies. And also to be prepared to complete the regional action plan and the institutional supplement, which we're going to ask you for by August 31st, 2019. So this is kind of the 1-year mark of coming back to, you gave us your institutional completion targets and your regional strategies last August, and this is kind of the where are we 1 year later. So we'll talk in detail about what's going to be asked for there, and we are very intentionally talking about it in April so that there's plenty of time to be ready by the time we get to August. Okay, so first a little national context. As I was thinking about what to share here, I was looking online, and 60 by 30 text is not a new idea. It's the Texas frame on an idea that is prevalent in lots of places around the country. There are lots and lots of states, 43 states, have higher education attainment goals of some variety, and some are 55, and some are 60, and some are looking at 2025, and some are 2030. So there's, variation on the margin, but backed by a lot of foundations and other intermediary organizations. This is an idea that has populated across the country. And so it's interesting to see, if you haven't seen this resource, A Stronger Nation, it's supported by the Lumina Foundation. They were one of the first to put out the big 60% goal for the nation. And so you can see lots of interesting data if you want to look comparatively at other states. One thing that's nice about what they do is they also include certificate completion, as we do. So their numbers match pretty close to the way that we estimate that information. So you can see there on the left which states, the ones that are highlighted, are the 43 states that do have attainment goals. And on the right, there was a new report that came out this summer that looked at the quality of those goals, if you will, and are thinking about specifically not only how do we increase attainment nationally and at the state level, but how do we do so in a way that's equitable. And so they reviewed all of these different states to look at their attainment goals to think about how well did they address concerns about equity gaps in attainment. And so Texas was one of just 17 of these states that actually met all the criteria for these high quality standards in terms of thinking not only about general attainment improvements, but equitable attainment improvements. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things that they looked at when they were kind of evaluating these different attainment goals. And Texas, as I said, met all of this criteria that they laid out. And so one, they said they're looking at explicit references to underrepresented student populations. So we, of course, have our completion target with those key underrepresented subpopulations in there. They said if you're doing a really good job, you're also including data on enrollment completion and attainment gaps, and that's readily available. They also indicated that there's an intention to improve equity by having benchmarks related to some of your goals and targets, which we have. And then also that you're identifying strategies to actually make those improvements. And so when I was looking through this report, I thought that was not only interesting, but when I kind of came to the bottom, you can see a little snippet here that they actually called out our regional target starter kits as an exemplary practice in this national study to say they're not only talking about these things, but they're talking about it in a way broken down at the regional level to help really equip people with the data to make informed decisions. So anyway, that was exciting for me to find Sunday night at my kitchen table when I was looking for these kinds of information. So why is this information so important? So I should just add that Texas got an A+ on this measure of having a great North Star to say this is where we want to go, and this is what we want to do. But we did not do as well when it comes to where are we now. So this work is so important because of the large disparities that we do see across subpopulations currently. So on this, what you can see here on this slide is that this shows the Hispanic to white attainment gap. And Texas has a 27 percentage point gap in the Hispanic population and the white population in terms of higher education attainment. So we got a pretty low ranking on that. We do a bit better, but still so much work to do in terms of the gap between white and African American population is at 15 percentage points. So with that in mind, I hope that you feel kind of a shared urgency, and I think we all have a shared responsibility to think about who are the students that we are not currently serving well, and how do we expand our reach to bring all of our population into higher education, help equip them on the path that is right for them, a certificate, a degree, from 2-year, 4-year, beyond, in a field that is going to provide kind of a meaningful work experience with a living wage. These are all the things I think we have a lot of shared commitment and values around. And I think the regional work can be a real vehicle for us to move this work forward. So transitioning now into kind of the trends where we are, just looking at the Texas data now, the latest numbers are good statewide. So we're at 43.5% of our 25 to 34-year-old population has some level of post-secondary credential, so from certificate on up. So 43.5, we went up 1.2 percentage points this last year. We were up 1.3 percentage points the year before. So this is actually great progress. These are very strong numbers and on the high end of the historical increases we've seen over the last 10, 15 years. 1.3 percentage points is actually exactly where we need to be every year going forward. So we're doing well, and we have to really keep up this aggressive pace. And as you can see, when you look across the 10 regions, there's quite a bit of variation here. There is almost almost 20 percentage point difference between the lowest and the highest here. So it's very different as you travel across the state. I do want to point out that this data comes from the American Community Survey. So almost everything else we talk about at the accountability meetings, this is data that you, the other measures are data that you supply directly to us. We have the full universe of data. We don't need to have any statistical inference because we've got the full population, and we can say this is the value. Unlike that, the American Community Survey, this is done from the Census Bureau, so we're sampling people in the population. So year to year, any change, there's going to be some amount of error in that. So I want to point out that the improvement that we saw at the state level, 43.5%, is a statistically significant increase. We also saw a statistically significant increase in our large regions of the Metroplex, Gulf Coast, and Central Texas. All of those went up at a statistically significant level. In the others, the changes are more modest and or the population size is smaller, so it's going to be hard. You would need a very large change in order to note that that's statistically significant. So in the other regions, some went up a little bit, some went down a little bit, and I just want to assure people not to panic about any of those things. This is sample data. We're going to look over several years to see what a trend looks like, but it just gives us a window into what a current sample of your population is looking like. But overall, statewide, moving in the right direction here. Next, I want to show you the regional completion numbers. You can see here listing, we have the 2017 completion information by region and the 2018 information. For those of you who were here this morning, you know that we had a little bit of a softer year overall statewide. And you can see in most regions there were increases, but there are a couple of regions where we did go down a little bit, but overall up about 2.2% in completions. Next is the high school to higher ed rates. So we're looking at, of all the students who graduate from high school in a particular year, how many come into higher education the following fall. And this is one important kind of pipeline into higher education, and I always like to note it's not the only one. We need returning and adult students as well. But for this kind of critical population coming into the pipeline, this is an area where we have not seen much progress over the last couple of years. So what you can see is that we were at 53, 52. You can see we still have the 2017 data. We don't yet have the 2018 data. That'll be coming pretty soon. We saw a tiny uptick at the 0.1% level. But in general, this is one where there is room to improve, and it is very intentionally one of the areas that we focus on for the regional targets, because it really does lend itself to more collaborative kind of efforts. Every single institution may or may not have a full view of all of the high school grads from your particular area, and we want to think about how best to serve them. So some of the regions saw increases. Northwest was the only one, I want to call them out as to have an increase of more than 1%. So good numbers in that region. All right. So just as a refresher of, so that's the latest data with most of our 2018 information broken out by region. And I just want to remind us kind of where we've been over the last year and a half plus. So what we asked folks to do, and this meeting last year, the accountability meeting, was one of the key places that we really, started to roll this out. And so we asked that at the regional level, people do something, which is to identify at least one powerful strategy in these three areas that we identified: the 60 by 30, the completion, and the high school to higher ed. And then we also asked at the institutional level, separately but hopefully in concert, that you would identify a numerical completion target just for your institution. And ideally, all those individual institution completion targets are going to build up to where we need to be as a region. So what we saw kind of coming out of this work is that we really wanted to drive and have seen evidence of kind of moving from general interest in improving outcomes to a much more tactical level of discussion around how much, in what programs, what kinds of degree level, et cetera. How do you get to these numbers at a regional level and an institutional level? And we also heard, not every region, some were more collaborative than others, but what some regions did is they kind of had their opening hand. These are our completion targets, and they kind of added it up, and they said, oh, we're really short. Okay, let's go back. And so everybody, can you do a little more? And so there was kind of a nice iterative process to say, where do we want to go, and how are we going to get there together? This work also has built some regional capacity, and I will fully admit that regional capacity is hard to build. And in some places there were sort of natural either organizations or intermediaries to kind of lend some of that structure to meet regionally, but it hasn't been happening. It hasn't happened spontaneously, because I always say that TWC has their workforce development boards. Those are staffed and paid for. There are people who are thinking about regional work. The education service centers from TEA at the K-12 level, those are staff. There are paid employees thinking about regional coordination. We do not have that same infrastructure in higher education, and so this is going to require a different kind of lift. We've had volunteers who have very generously offered their time and are increasingly thinking about how do we work this into kind of P16 councils or other kinds of structures that are there to make sure that we can kind of keep meeting and build to real implementation level work. We have done this, and I think you'll see this when we get to the action plan piece, that we want to combine it in a way that I hope will be helpful for everybody, kind of the power of the state data resources with your local knowledge. So we have one really good view on the data, but it doesn't tell us everything we need to know about the how and the why. And so this work has created a good back and forth for us to better understand the local context along with the statewide numbers. And then finally, talked about this kind of creating a cadence of mutual responsibility for progress. So what we want to do is keep coming together, keep looking at the numbers, keep coming back to it. So the idea of initiative fatigue is real. People have lots going on, and I completely understand that. The idea here is not to build something new and different from what you're already doing. It's saying let's knit it together and let's stay focused on the goals and targets for the state and how all these pieces kind of fit together. And again, we're going to come back to it year after year as we make kind of these measurable improvements towards our big goals and targets. All right, so over the academic year prior, from 17 to 18, we kind of rolled this strategy out. And one of the key pieces was to identify regional points of contact from our side so that there's a staff person, at minimum, there's a staff person thinking about the concerns of your region regularly. So, and that's one person who's dedicated to you, who's thinking about Northwest or thinking about Upper East and what's going on there. We also did a variety of things, data fellows trainings, we used the accountability meetings, other ways that we've kind of rolled this out, provided data support, and encouraged engagement. We also developed those regional target starter kits that I kind of mentioned at the beginning. If you have not checked out the starter kit, I highly recommend while you are here today on your phone or on your laptop, please go to 60by30tx.com. Our hub for everything for the plan. And under resources, you'll find the regional target starter kit. So that is a great first place to engage if you're new. If you are seasoned, there is new data available there in the data workbooks, and that's what we'll spend time talking about in a little bit. And there's also some new pieces which I'll share. So like I said, we ended in August with these regional submission forums. Tell us about your powerful strategies. And then at the institutional level, what are your institutional targets? And so the next thing I want to do is share kind of the results of those August 2018 submissions. So the thing people are always most curious about is where did those numbers land? What did it look like when we got all those institutional numbers and put them together? So what you can see here, this is a very detailed slide. Hopefully you're in a place where you can see a screen or you've got the printouts, is that kind of the sum total of this is you can see for 2020, 2025, and 2030, there's 3 columns of data for each. So the first column is regional targets for institutional completion. Those are the numbers that the coordinating board developed as we broke out the total completions by region. In yellow, what you can see are the sum of all the institutional numbers that we actually received. Okay, and we added those up. And then the third column is how close the institutional numbers got to the regional number that we were aiming for. And the good news here, I see a lot of good news in this, which is that we're within 2% of the target of the benchmark for 2020. We're within 7% of the 2025 targets, and we're within 12% of the 2030 targets. So what this tells me is that institutions and regions did a very good job of kind of balancing, this is a big lift, this is very ambitious, but we also need to kind of create things that are reasonable, right? So, but people went for it, and I'm really pleased to see how close we are. I think that being 12% under for the 2030 does not concern me at all. The crystal ball is very fuzzy when you start to look out that far. People are naturally going to be conservative about what's possible. So I think as we keep going, there will be a good opportunity to see those numbers come up. I also think this is probably a more honest process, because what we asked institutions to do is say, you tell us. Under the previous strategic plan, we sort of assigned institutional completion numbers, more of a numeric process, but this is art and science, right? So we wanted people to say, this is what we really can do. And so kind of intentionally traded some of the cleanliness of the data for more local ownership, and that's what we wanted. So hopefully this process was something that was generative at your institution and also is helping to move us a really good distance towards our big goals and targets here. So now moving into the strategy level information. So folks are probably always more interested in the numbers, but I'm always more interested in the strategies, because if you don't know how you're going to get there, I don't know that we're going to get there, right? So these were kind of the best bets from each of the regional responses. And so under the 60 by 30 educated population goal, the kinds of things that we saw lots of commonalities around were, number one, business and industry and higher education connections. So people were saying, either for kind of the development of marketable skills, or more broadly, we just want to make sure our programs are relevant to the labor market that's out there. We want to make sure that we're meeting the demands of employers and employment opportunities that are really there. And we saw several regions talk about deepening those connections. On several regions, we're talking about adult stop-out and returning populations in different ways. Several regions have really grasped onto this, that we're not going to get there alone by just focusing on our high school to higher ed pipeline, that we really need to be thinking about those students out there who either never came to college or were some college but no degree populations. How do we bring them back and support them? And others were focused on kind of a large-scale public information campaign, making sure people understand the importance of higher education and what the goals and targets are for the area. How do you get there? Under the completion strategy, the biggie was transfer. Not surprisingly, when you put people together in a regional group and you ask them, what is it you can do together that you can't do by themselves, do by yourself? Transfer is at the top of the list. So we had 8 regions talk about the importance of streamlining that process for our mobile students to make sure that they are moving effectively towards their completion goals. So several were talking about reverse transfer, a couple of mentions of fields of study, and then formalizing a transfer consortium as another example of those. The other biggie was guided pathways. I don't think there was a single response that didn't say pathways in there somewhere in some form. And so I think these are really focused on kind of what the AACC and Georgia State and others are talking about as sort of scaled guided pathways with much more intensive advising and clear degree maps and meta majors and those kinds of things. Several others were talking about more strategic use of data as another strategy. So auto graduation or auto completion came up earlier. That was one of the examples that we saw. But also just kind of many-to-many institution data sharing. So if you're not on the same system or otherwise, sometimes it can be hard to understand what the flow of students are across institutions, and regions wanting to be more thoughtful and strategic about how they do that. And then finally, high school to higher education strategies. These were more probably the most disparate in terms of the areas, but folks were talking about more strategic use of dual credit, AP, IB, and college prep courses. So tons of students are having these college experiences before they leave high school. How do we make sure that they are the right experiences that really accelerate people into a higher education credential, and wanting to leverage those opportunities or revisit some of what's we talked about, like a lot is not necessarily the best. You know, which courses or which kinds of experiences are best is where the conversation was. Some interest in tracking FAFSA and Apply Texas completions, thinking about that gateway into higher education. The next one is kind of thinking about guided pathways, but how do we map it back to K-12? What does that look like? So maybe matching back to HB5 endorsements or other kinds of on-ramping programs. And then again, data sharing came up in this. So saying that there are sort of gaps in the communication between higher education and K-12, districts, ESCs, individual schools, et cetera, to say, are we aware of how many students are really coming into higher education? How well prepared are they when they come? And so we would do a good service to not only share that information more regularly, but to actually talk to people about what do they see in the data, what are the challenges, how we design strategies around them. So, any questions or comments about kind of where we landed for the summary from last year? All right. We'll have lots of time in breakouts, so feel free to grab any of us at any time. So the next piece is kind of what's next. So we're deep into the 2018-19 academic year, right? But what we shifted from is thinking about kind of setting out what do we want to do to let's actually start implementing and move to kind of the next phase of this work. So this year is about implementation, strengthening regional capacity and organization to do this kind of work, and also sustaining momentum. So I think some folks were like, I turned that in August, I'm glad that's over. unfortunately, here we are. So there's going to be more to do here. So one of the things that we did is to put forth a legislative appropriation request to try and provide more substantial funding. I will be honest with you, it's not looking great, but I wanted you to know in terms of our commitment that we did put that on our exceptional item request for this year. So, start praying, it's time for that. We also we had some administrative funds that we were able to leverage, and we did these $5,000 mini grants to support dissemination. We thought kind of the first big thing, once you have these goals, targets, and strategies, is to go ahead and let people know that they're there. So we wanted, and you'll see some examples I'll show in just a minute about what people have been doing with their dissemination work. We also added to the starter kit, so we moved from this is kind of what you need to know to set your strategies and your targets to here are some kind of key things to talk about when it comes to implementation. Who's actually going to do what, right? And then we also, as I mentioned, updated the data workbooks. Additional data fellows trainings, other dissemination activities. The tri-agency group has been very interested in this work, and they continue to want to connect. So TEA, Coordinating Board, and the Workforce Commission meet regularly once a month, and there is a tri-agency report issued under the governor. And there's a lot of love and support for 60 by 30 text in there, and you'll see that both from the K-12 side and from the workforce side, they really see 60 by 30 text as sort of central for the whole state, and that they need to be feeding into it. And so that's, I think, very exciting to have that kind of recognition and support. So it's been part of tri-agency events and so forth. So we've been kind of doing calls and other kinds of things with the regions to kind of keep this work moving. So by August, as I mentioned, we'll have those the regional action plan, so 1 per region, 10, and then the institutional supplement for every public and independent institution. It's a short survey, and I'll tell you about what's going to be on it in just a second. The last thing on here is the